After the defeat at Mustafar, a sense of loss consumed Darth Vader. The knowledge that Padme and the child she bore were dead, and that he himself was responsible, caused a whirlwind of hatred and regret. Obi-Wan's words, accusing him of having become the very destroyer of everything he had sworn to protect, echoed in his mind. Palpatine's strategy, which he believed guaranteed his loyalty to the dark side, began to crumble. Vader's hatred turned to his master, as he began to blame Palpatine for leading him down this path of no return. This feeling of betrayal ignited in Vader the desire to dethrone Palpatine. However, he soon realized that the limitations of his suit would hamper any attempt to confront the Emperor directly. The armor, although powerful, restricted his movements and abilities. He knew that, in order to rebel, he would need something other than brute strength. He would need a body capable of reaching its full potential. That's how he began to devise a solution to overcome the barriers imposed by his condition. Initially, Vader considered upgrading his armor, believing that technological improvements could provide the necessary advantage. Ideas about advanced upgrades began to emerge in his mind. He planned to incorporate more powerful weapons, more sophisticated defense systems, and even enhancements intended to increase his connection to the Force. However, as he pondered these changes, another, even more ambitious possibility began to take shape. What if it were possible to regenerate his body? Restoring what he had lost could be the key to his liberation. Determined to explore this idea, Vader secretly gathered a group of scientists. They set up an isolated laboratory where they could work without attracting Palpatine's attention. For weeks, these specialists carried out intense experiments, trying to repair Vader's physical damage. But despite all their efforts, the progress was minimal. With each failed attempt, it became clear that technology alone would not be enough to achieve the ambitious goal of regeneration. One of the scientists suggested that Vader's body needed more vital energy for the procedures to be successful. It was then that Vader began to consider the idea of combining science with the power of the Force. He believed that by manipulating the midichlorians, he could energize the regeneration process. The memory of the story of Darth Plagueis, told by Palpatine years ago, rekindled his hope. Plagueis, according to Palpatine, had mastered the manipulation of midichlorians to create life and overcome death. This ability could be the missing piece. Driven by this idea, Vader began an obsessive search for information about Plagueis experiments. Weeks of research led him to Sojourn, Plagueis' former secret refuge. This dark and isolated place was where the Sith Lord conducted his most daring studies on the Force and biology. Complex equipment, mysterious substances, and an atmosphere imbued with sinister energy were all part of this macabre setting, now abandoned after Plagueis' death. On arriving in Sojourn, Vader found traces of Plagueis' work. Ancient manuscripts, decaying machines, and an atmosphere charged with memories of the dark side seemed to whisper the secrets of immortality. Determined to recover this knowledge, he once again summoned his scientists to help him decipher and resume the experiments. The aim was clear: to unite Plagueis science with Vader's power in order to achieve the regeneration he so desired. The experiments on Sojourn began. The scientists worked tirelessly to understand the principles left by Plagueis, while Vader used his connection to the Force to power the attempts. However, the process was slow and dangerous. Each step brought new challenges, but also revelations about the limits of biology and the dark side. Vader was increasingly convinced that he was on the right track, although doubts about success plagued him. As he continued his experiments, Vader began to sense something peculiar about the Force. The laboratory, imbued with ancient energies, seemed to be influencing his perception. He believed that Plagueis might have left traces of his presence, like a kind of echo in the Force. This only increased his determination to continue his studies, even if the chances of success seemed minimal. Over time, the scientists began to make progress, albeit small. The midichlorians began to respond to Vader's manipulations, although the process was still far from perfect. Each attempt seemed to bring him closer to his goal, but the sense of urgency didn't leave him. He knew that Palpatine could discover his plan at any moment, and that his betrayal would have devastating consequences. But for Vader, The possibility of restoring his body and freeing himself from Palpatine's control was a risk worth taking. Vader made constant visits to the Sith laboratory in Sojourn, increasingly involved in the experiments. He closely monitored the scientists' progress and often offered himself up as a guinea pig, aware that his high concentration of midichlorians made his tests unique. During these visits, he would delve into the equipment and records left behind by Darth Plagueis, trying to understand the details of the experiments and helping to guide the scientists with his knowledge of the Force. These interactions increased his frustration, but also fueled his hope that total regeneration was possible. After months of trial and adjustment on one of their visits to the laboratory, the scientists came up with a surprising breakthrough. They had managed to develop a technique capable of stimulating the midichlorians to channel the energy of the Force to create life. At first, this seemed like the perfect solution to Vader's dilemma. However, there was an obstacle. The stimulation could only be carried out on a completely lifeless body. This meant that Vader's body would have to be put to death for the process to be activated. Vader was filled with doubt and suspicion. He began to consider the possibility of a trap set by Palpatine or even by enemies infiltrated among the scientists. He spent weeks studying the records and reviewing the calculations, trying to find inconsistencies or hidden intentions. However, at the end of his investigation, he concluded that the procedure seemed legitimate. Seeing the risk as a price worth paying for the possibility of freeing himself from his limitations, Vader decided to undergo the experiment. The regeneration chamber was meticulously prepared. The scientists, under Vader's direct supervision, made the final adjustments before starting the procedure. Vader entered the chamber calmly, but the tension was palpable among everyone present. At a crucial moment, the scientists induced a cardiac arrest in Vader's body. He was officially dead. Soon after, they began to apply the stimuli to the midichlorians, hoping that they would trigger the regeneration process. For a long time, there was no response. Vader's body remained inert, with no signs of life, while the scientists closely monitored the equipment. When it became clear that time was against them, they decided to try to revive Vader manually. But nothing seemed to work. For a moment, a sense of failure gripped the laboratory. Vader was dead, and there was no sign that anything would change. A few minutes later, however, something unexpected happened. The equipment began to register anomalous activity in the midichlorians of Vader's body. Slowly, the scientists realized that these particles were reacting to the stimuli. A wave of energy began to form, flowing towards the lifeless body. Then Vader's heart gave its first beat. As the process accelerated, Vader's body transformed before the astonished eyes of the scientists. The regeneration they had expected to take weeks began to take place in a matter of hours. His skin, once burnt and scarred, began to regenerate rapidly. His face, previously unrecognizable, once again took on the appearance of Anakin Skywalker. The laboratory, once dominated by tense silence, was now filled with incredulous murmurs about what they were witnessing. The Force, something that for them was only an abstract concept, was manifesting itself in a tangible way that defied the known laws of physics and biology. A few hours later, Vader opened his eyes. Although still dependent on respirators, he could already feel the Force flowing through his body like never before. Even in his physical prime, still as Anakin Skywalker, he had never experienced such a connection. Every fiber of his being seemed to pulsate with energy, as if he had become a pure channel of the Force. This rebirth filled him with a mixture of power and purpose. The next day, Vader was taken out of the chamber. Although the scientists still kept him under observation, it was clear that his body had almost completely regenerated. He was already breathing without the aid of apparatus, and his skin was practically restored. However, what was most striking was the reading of his energy levels. The concentration of midichlorians in his body had reached unimaginable levels. It was as if he had become a living source of unlimited energy. The scientists, dazzled, continued to monitor Vader's vital functions. They analyzed each piece of data carefully, trying to understand what had happened. The only possible conclusion was that something in the nature of the Force had transcended the limits of science. For Vader, what had been just an experiment had become an unequivocal demonstration of the power of the Force, something he now knew he could exploit like never before. When Vader stood up from the chamber on his own, he could hardly believe his eyes. His body was renewed. His prostheses had been replaced and were now covered in a special fabric that made them imperceptible and functional like never before. He experienced an overwhelming sensation of energy that seemed to overflow, as if his body was unable to contain it. It was as if his connection with the Force had broken all limits, and he felt invincible. The simple act of walking made it seem as if he could move mountains. Conquering the galaxy single-handedly seemed, at that moment, not only possible but inevitable. Determined to put an end to Palpatine's reign, Vader wasted no time. He knew that his new strength and connection to the Force were superior to those of the Emperor. His body and mind were completely aligned with one purpose: to dethrone the one he now saw as truly responsible for his tragedy. He prepared his ship for an immediate trip to Coruscant, the center of galactic power, with a carefully crafted plan to overthrow his master publicly and definitively. Vader knew he needed an approach that combined intimidation, strategy, and a demonstration of power. He called a meeting of admirals and asked the Emperor to attend, something that was unusual and caught everyone's attention. When the room was full, Vader entered with Palpatine and destroyed the door openers with his lightsaber, isolating everyone present. "You are here to witness the birth of a new empire," he declared. Removing his helmet, he revealed his regenerated face, the face of Anakin Skywalker. Palpatine stood motionless, unable to believe his eyes, while the other officers looked on, terrified, unable to understand what was happening. With a calculated move, Vader closed his eyes and channeled all the energy he could through the Force. He unleashed a massive attack of lightning towards Palpatine, a blast of energy so powerful that it threw him backwards before he could react. The officers in the room instinctively backed away, some shielding their eyes, others falling unconscious from the intensity of the attack. To them, it seemed like witchcraft, something beyond comprehension. Palpatine tried to pull himself together, but it was clear that the situation was completely beyond his control. Still stunned, Palpatine tried to retaliate by launching his own Force rays towards Vader. But the now regenerated Sith was on another level. He defended the attack with ease, deflecting it with his saber, before unleashing another, even more destructive blast of energy. This time, Palpatine didn't resist. His body fell to the ground, motionless. The Emperor was dead, and the room was plunged into a terrifying silence. The officers were terrified, certain that they would be the next victims. But Vader, with a firm tone, ordered those who were conscious, "Sit down." Everyone obeyed immediately, overcome by fear. Vader then proclaimed himself Emperor. He pointed to Palpatine's lifeless body and declared, "As you can see, the Emperor is dead. You now serve me." The terrifying display of power was enough to ensure everyone's obedience. The news quickly spread throughout Coruscant and the galaxy. Darth Vader, now at the height of his power, had assumed the throne. And to secure his position, he began to rule with an iron fist, eliminating any threat, no matter how small, to his domain. The desire to expand took hold of Vader, almost like a compulsion. Conquering new territories and destroying enemies strengthened his connection with the Force, acting as an escape valve for the energy that seemed to have no end. With each planet he subdued, he felt his strength grow even more. His officers, intimidated, dared not question his orders, while the Empire became more powerful and feared than ever. Over the years, Vader intensified his connection with the Force. He developed techniques that amplified his power, exploiting the limits of his midichlorians to reach levels never before imagined. His figure, now even more imposing, was enough to inspire terror in any enemy. He often made a point of showing off, performing brutal displays of strength to ensure the loyalty of his subordinates. Whenever he took off his helmet, he revealed Anakin's face, a reminder of his transformation and his superiority. Among his darkest activities was the hunt for surviving Jedi. Vader personally took command of the Inquisitors, the group created by Palpatine to eradicate the Jedi. The Inquisitors didn't just respect him. They worshipped him as if he were almost a divine entity. Such was his connection to the Force. For them, Vader was more than a Sith, he was a symbol of absolute power. And for Vader, every Jedi hunted represented another step towards total control of the galaxy and the consolidation of his new order. During one of the hunts for the Jedi, Vader received information about the possible presence of survivors on Tatooine, the planet where he had grown up, but which he had not visited since his transformation. When he disembarked with the Inquisitors, he felt a familiar disturbance in the Force, something that seemed to come from the past. He recognized it immediately. Obi-Wan Kenobi was there. "Obi-Wan, I knew you couldn't hide forever," he muttered to himself as he walked across the hot sand. Vader began to explore Tatooine, getting closer and closer to the presence he felt. What would Kenobi be doing here, on my home planet? He wondered. His investigation led him to the vicinity of his former home. There, the connection to the Force became more intense. He paused for a moment, watching the horizon and allowing the memories of his childhood to invade him for a brief moment before moving on. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan, aware of the presence of the Inquisitors, went to his cave to seek shelter. As he entered, he was surprised by the figure of Vader, who was waiting there with his helmet under his arm. "That's not possible. Anakin, are you alive?" asked Obi-Wan in disbelief. Vader replied coolly, "No, Anakin is dead." Obi-Wan took a step back, shocked. "What are you doing here?" asked the Jedi. Vader then teased, "I came to hunt Jedi, but I ended up getting you as a gift." The tension in the air was palpable. Obi-Wan tried to disguise his nervousness, but Vader noticed. "Have you nothing to tell me, old friend?" asked Vader, his voice laced with irony. Obi-Wan hesitated, but Vader continued, "I already know about my son. He's being taken to my ship as we speak." Obi-Wan's eyes widened. "Anakin, what have you become?" he asked, visibly shaken. Vader replied coolly, "I became what was necessary to reach my full potential." Without another word, Vader threw a lightsaber at Obi-Wan and activated his own, charging forward with fury. Obi-Wan reluctantly activated his saber, but it was clear that he was out of shape and emotionally shaken. Vader attacked with force and precision, while Obi-Wan only defended himself, increasingly weakened. The rematch was short-lived, and Vader struck Obi-Wan across the chest with his red saber. As Obi-Wan fell, breathing hard, he tried to utter his last words. "The boy! Take good care of the boy. Let him choose." Vader stood still, watching his former master succumb, but he didn't feel the anger or satisfaction he had expected. Something was wrong. He extinguished his saber and turned away, leaving the cave behind, now certain that Obi-Wan was only there to protect Luke. Back on the ship, Vader took Luke, still a child of 5, to Coruscant. There, he decided to raise him as his own son and, at the same time, began his training. The boy showed an impressive connection with the Force, something that Vader couldn't ignore. During the training sessions, Luke asked innocently, "Why did you change your name?" Vader replied, "Because my old master gave me this name, and I'm not the same person anymore." Luke then insisted, "Anakin Skywalker. I like that name. Why don't you use it again?" Vader, visibly annoyed, replied, "I already told you, Luke. I'm not Anakin anymore." But the boy, with the innocence of his age, retorted, "Would you rather use the name your old master gave you than the name my grandmother chose?" Vader remained silent, not knowing what to say. Luke's words echoed in his mind, planting memories he couldn't ignore. Luke seemed to be the antithesis of everything Vader needed to maintain his power as a Sith. His innocence and purity were like an antidote to the dark side. Every interaction with his son awakened feelings in Vader that he believed had long since disappeared. "Why do these memories keep coming back?" thought Vader, watching his son train, while seeing flashes of his own training as Anakin Skywalker alongside Obi-Wan. Over time, Luke managed to convince his father to go back to using the name Anakin Skywalker. "If you're my father, you should be who you really are," Luke said on one occasion. Reluctant at first, Vader began to give in. The love for his son grew within him, and Palpatine's teachings began to disintegrate. Anakin Skywalker, who had previously been buried under layers of hatred and pain, began to emerge again. Luke was, for Vader, a spark of light amidst the shadows. Over the years, Luke Skywalker became a legendary warrior. Trained from an early age by Anakin, he mastered both the art of combat and the secrets of the Force. Together, father and son formed an unbeatable duo, inspiring respect and awe wherever they went. Luke's skills not only rivaled those of his father, but also complemented him. He was a born strategist, combining brute force with tactical intelligence, becoming a fundamental pillar in the galactic domain led by Anakin. Despite their harmonious coexistence on many missions, Luke's presence began to shape Anakin in unexpected ways. Their connection brought back memories of the old Anakin Skywalker before his fall to the dark side. Luke, with his pure heart and his vision of justice, often questioned his father's decisions. He saw no point in the existence of an empire that ruled by force and oppression. These questions led to long arguments between the two, especially when Anakin demanded unrestricted loyalty. One day, Luke was sent to Alderaan to investigate rumors of an alliance between the local government and the rebels. During his mission, he met Leia Organa, a young representative of the planet. As soon as he saw her, he felt something different. The Force was incredibly strong in her, something he hadn't expected to find. What's more, an inexplicable connection emerged between the two of them, something that went beyond simple Jedi intuition. Luke returned to tell his father about this discovery, intrigued by what he had felt. Upon hearing the story, Anakin ordered Leia to be brought to the Imperial ship for questioning. When he saw her for the first time, he felt the same powerful connection that Luke had mentioned. Anakin began to question her about her origin and her life, but Leia gave only superficial information, mentioning that she had been raised by the Organa. Unsatisfied, Anakin decided to go directly to Bail Organa. After much pressure and veiled threats, Bail realized that he could no longer hide the truth. Leia was facing her real family, her father and brother. When Bail revealed the truth, Leia was horrified. The idea of being the daughter of the Emperor, the man responsible for so much suffering in the galaxy, filled her with revulsion. Anakin tried to persuade her, offering her a place at his and Luke's side to command the galaxy together. However, Leia categorically refused. The arguments between her and Luke became intense, as he agreed with many of her points. Together, they decided to join forces to convince Anakin to give up his post as Emperor and return power to the Senate. Despite Luke and Leia's efforts, Anakin refused to give up everything he had built. "I can't go back on everything I've done," he said, his voice laden with guilt and regret. It was then that he heard a familiar laugh. Turning around, he found the figure of Yoda as a Force ghost. Luke and Leia, sensitive to the Force, could also see the former Jedi Master. Yoda spoke calmly. "The way back is always available, young Skywalker." Anakin, however, shook his head and replied, "Not for me," thinking of all the atrocities he had committed, including the death of Obi-Wan. Suddenly, another voice echoed in the room. "It's all right, Anakin. What happened is in the past. I forgive you. It's time to move on with your family." It was Obi-Wan Kenobi, who appeared beside Yoda like a Force ghost. Leia stepped forward and said firmly, "Father, hand the Republic back to the Senate and come with us. Build something new, something that honors who you really are." Her words struck Anakin deeply, as he looked at Leia, Luke, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, feeling the possibility of redemption for the first time in years. Leia was trying to finish the job that Luke had unknowingly done all these years against Anakin's dark side. Anakin finally gave in. He ordered that power be returned to the Senate, allowing the election of a new chancellor to lead the galaxy. Word spread quickly, and the galaxy began to recover from its long period of oppression. Luke and Leia became central figures in the restoration of democracy, while Anakin, though still heavy-hearted, felt a lightness he hadn't experienced since his days as a Jedi. At the insistence of Luke, Yoda, and Obi-Wan, Anakin founded a new Jedi Order. He knew he had to rebuild what he had destroyed, creating a generation of Jedi that balanced power and compassion. The new Jedi Order would not only be a symbol of hope, but also a chance for Anakin to right the wrongs of the past and leave a lasting legacy.